Today we have a really hot button subject for the message today. I don't think you're gonna wanna miss it. I'll even give you a little hint about what it's about. Have you ever asked this question? Who gets to say what I do with my body sexually? Okay, maybe that was a little bit too big of a hint, but today we're talking about the sexual revolution in our series, Revolutions. And I think that Pastor Paul's got some really great stuff to say, so make sure that you stick around for the message. And just as well, I wanna give you some details on our Easter services here at SMCC. I know the calendars fill up, and so I wanna make sure that you have those details. So make sure to stick around for that as well. Welcome to SMCC Online.
Humble King, Holy One, friend of sinners, God's own Son, God in flesh among men. You walked my road, you understand. Servant King, friend to me, He saved my soul and washed my feet. Here I'll bow, give all to you. Lord, I want to be like you. All I want, all I need is more of you, less of me. Take this life, Lord, it's yours. Have my heart and have it all. Oh, have it all, Lord. I will walk in your ways, love your word, seek your face. My reward, my soul pursue, to know you more, to be like you. All I want, all I need, more of you, less of me. Take this life, Lord, it's yours. Have my heart, have it all. All I want, all I need, Lord, more of you, less of me. Take this life, Lord, it's yours. Have my heart, have it all. Oh, have it all, Lord. We give it all to you, Jesus. Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Sing in the name of Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you. All I want and all I need is more of you, Lord, and less of me. Take this life, Lord, it's yours. Have my heart and have it all.
Thank you, Cam and the band, for leading us in a song that just helps explain the truth of who we are in God. Now, before we get into our message with Pastor Paul today, like I said, I wanted to give you details on Easter. I know that your calendar fills up quickly with family and friends and maybe even traveling, and so I want to make sure that you knew what we are doing at SMCC for Easter. What you can do right now is open up a new tab in your browser, pull out your phone right now and type in this address, smccutah.org/Easter. And there you're going to see all the details that we have about our Easter services at all of our locations with times and days and Good Friday as well. And then additionally, also times for our SMCC Online Good Friday and Easter as well. So I wanted to make sure that you got that right now. You can go pull out your phone if you haven't right now, open up a new tab if you're sitting at your computer watching this, smccutah.org/Easter. And you can find all the details that you need right there. And today, like I said earlier, we are going to be talking about the sexual revolution in week 3 of our series, Revolutions. Let's go ahead and join Pastor Paul and the rest of our locations right now.
Have you ever heard the term, the cure is worse than the disease? Man, that's been so true in my life from time to time. One time that comes to my mind is when I was on vacation recently, and I knew I was coming down with a cold, so I wanted to have a really good night's sleep. And I scrounged around in my travel bag and found a pill. It was an allergy pill. Man, I took that thing thinking that would kind of help knock me out, let me breathe during the night really well. Well, it turns out that it was a non-drowsy allergy pill, and I didn't sleep at all that night, and my cold got worse. Now, that's a small example. It's nothing compared to a a study by Johns Hopkins University. Look at what they found. Johns Hopkins study claimed that over 250,000 people in the U.S. were victims of fatal medical errors. While this may seem like a staggering number, other reports claim that as many as 440,000 people in the United States die every year due to medical errors. Their figure surpasses the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that is CDC's third leading cause of death. So that is a higher cause of death than respiratory disease. Third leading cause of death in America, medical errors. The cure in that situation is worse than the disease. Man, that gives me pause in ever wanting to go to the hospital again. I know I will if I need to, but man, I'm gonna ask a lot of questions when I get there. Well, I bring this up because there is a cure for a disease, or at least perceived disease in America, that is much worse than anybody thought it would be. The cure ended up not helping at all. And what I'm talking about is the desire to rid ourselves as a culture of guilt and also some of the consequences of sex. Sex outside of marriage, having babies. And so the cure is to guilt and unwanted pregnancies, of course, was the pill form for a contraceptive that would stop that. But also the cure for the sexual guilt that we felt was the sexual revolution. And so to make sure that we're on the same page today, I'm going to talk a lot about this, but I want to make sure everybody understands what I mean by the sexual revolution. And this is, of course, from Wikipedia, a trusted source for all things, right? So it says this: the sexual revolution, also known as a time of sexual liberation, was a social movement that challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and interpersonal relationships throughout the United States and the developed world from the 1960s to the 1980s. Sexual liberation included increased acceptance of sex outside of traditional heterosexual, monogamous relationships, primarily marriage, the normalization of contraception and the pill, public nudity, pornography, premarital sex, homosexuality, masturbation, alternative forms of sexuality, and the legalization of abortion that all followed. Did I say that today is a PG-13 topic? All right, I think we need to know that. Well, welcome to our series, Revolutions. We're in part 3 of this series. And what we're trying to do is look at some of the just huge cultural shifts, like crazy, impactful shifts in American culture that were brought on by new ways of thinking. And the whole idea is that normally a revolution is a push against a government that's oppressive. And it's a desire to be free from that oppressive government. But what we're talking about is the kind of cultural revolutions that actually ended up oppressing us more than the freedom that we were after. And so consequently, today we're talking about the sexual revolution. And we're going to try to correct what I call some oppressive thinking about sexual ethics. So that's where we're going today. Here's my big observation to kind of get us going here. In our desire to cure the guilt surrounding sex outside of marriage, our culture, the American culture, has experienced many unwanted and unexpected consequences. All right, that's my observation. I really believe that. Now I want to try to prove that. I'm going to say that perhaps no other cultural revolution in the last 70 years has had more impact on America. I think that we can say that the impact has been profound and destructive on the American family. And I'm going to try to show that in just a bit. But that's my opening salvo. That's what I want you to start to consider. So let's look at the promise behind the sexual revolution and then what the reality really is. So the promise is this, that I could experience freedom to have sex with whoever, whenever, and for whatever reason that will lead me to a better life. That's the sexual revolution. That's the promise that it's important that I get to do what I want sexually, and nobody should be able to tell me what to do. I'm free to choose for myself what's best for me in the world of sexual ethics. Well, the reality, I think, is that there's now more divorce, more abortions, more single-parent homes. And by the way, we have statistics to support each one of these statements. There's more divorce, more abortions, more single-parent homes, more crime. And I think part of this is, of course, the result of single-parent homes, especially where dad is absent. So more crime, more incarceration, more depression, and more general unhappiness, more loneliness than ever before experienced in American history. That's the condition that we are in here in 2022. And it all started in the 1960s. Some people even say in the 1950s. The sexual revolution or sexual liberation movement has resulted in some unintended consequences where the cure now is worse than the disease. So let's just say this. The desire to have the freedom to have sex with whoever, whenever, and for whatever reasons has resulted in, number one, marriage rates plummeting. For sure, we've seen that. I've got a little graph for you today that will come up on the screen. And this graph shows that since the 1950s into the 60s and ongoing, fewer and fewer people are getting married. More and more couples just cohabitate. Singleness is not necessarily singleness without sex, but singleness with partners that are not a spouse. And so more and more children are being raised in homes without a dad, especially. And also, there's more and more loneliness as there's less and less commitment to a lifetime of marriage. And so we see this in America today. We didn't know that this would be the result, but it certainly is. And I think that all the negative social ills of America can be traced back to the breakup of the home. The unit, the family unit with a mom and a dad that love each other and are committed to each other is the foundation for a healthy culture and a healthy society. And so when you have fewer and fewer people get married, you have more and more kids growing up without that type of security. Another, I think, unintended consequences would be that there is a number of abortions that are increasing. Now, I know I need to be sensitive here. I think that the statistics are pretty staggering about the number of women that have had an abortion in America, and I'm sensitive to that. But the fact that I need to be sensitive and that this is a very sensitive topic says everything I want to say about the negative consequences of abortion. Not only have well over 800,000 children been aborted this last year, but also many studies show that the majority of women that have had an abortion now feel bad about that. They feel like that was a mistake. In other words, they regret it. And because of that, there's guilt, there's shame, there's mental health issues associated with that. And so the negative certainly outweighs the positive, especially when we're talking about abortion. So my point here today is that what promised to liberate us has actually put us in some kind of bondage. Bondage to the consequences that were unanticipated and unwanted. Well, the bigger picture of the sexual revolution or sexual liberation was the fact that the church had lost its effectiveness in the 1950s. There was quite a few people going to church, but the church itself was not vital in America. A lot of people had lost track of what it meant to be a born-again Christian, somebody who had committed their lives to Christ in such a way that there was full devotion with full delight. In other words, a whole lot of people in a whole lot of churches were just going through the motions. And so it seemed meaningless to enough people that it was rejected. And so the cultural revolution that we're calling sexual revolution really was built upon the failure of the church to actually be relevant in that time. And so there was a complete rejection of the moral authority of the church and the moral authority of God's word to tell us what to do sexually at the end of the 1950s and into the 1960s. And that's why we have this revolution. So the big idea here is that Christian sexual ethics represent the original sexual revolution. You see, we have a sexual revolution, but it is really kind of a counter-revolution to what really took place 2,000 years ago. And beyond that, when we think about Moses and what took place in Israel in terms of what marriage meant to them, there was a covenant between a husband and wife. The thought was that the two became one and were to make a lifelong commitment to each other. Any sex outside of that was wrong. In fact, God said to David, when you become king, don't be like the other kings. Don't take a bunch of wives, don't take a bunch of concubines and have sex with all these women. You're supposed to be faithful to your wife. Of course, he didn't do that. Solomon didn't do that. It was wrong. God said to David, you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, David committed adultery and he was confronted on that. Just because he was king didn't mean he could do whatever he wanted to do sexually. There are some things that were right and some things that were wrong. And those things were pronounced by God to Moses, to David, and to the other prophets. All right, now we climb into the New Testament. We see that Jesus is a revolutionary. Jesus said things that were so hard to hear for even the Jewish people. You see, the Jewish people had already come to a place where they got some workarounds around the law, around this idea. And so obviously they were getting divorced just like anybody else because they wanted to have sex with other people other than their wives. And so all the laws were pretty much tailor-made for men in those days, and they were now divorcing their wives for any kind of reason at all. And Jesus said, that's wrong. You can't do that. And in fact, if you get divorced, you're not supposed to be remarried. You're supposed to stay single. And they looked at each other and they said, well, who would want to get married then? I mean, this is ridiculous. And Jesus, I think, just looked at him and said, you know what? You've lost your way. You don't understand how important the sexual ethics grounded in marriage really are. And so Jesus was the original revolutionary of his time. Then the Apostle Paul came into the picture and he joined that revolution. And he reiterated the things that Jesus Christ taught, and also some of the things that were taught by Moses. And so we find ourselves back into a situation where the Apostle Paul was writing to a culture that was far more depraved even than America today. We would say that the pagan culture in Greece and in Rome and other ancient cities right around the turn, well, let's say the first century, their sexual ethics would make America look like Disneyland comparatively, you know? They were like the Las Vegas and we're like the Disneyland historically. And so in that culture, it was not unusual for a person of prestige, a person of position, a person of power, a person of wealth, to basically have no rules sexually. They could have a mistress, They could have sex with a slave girl. They could have sex with a young boy. And we're talking about men now. We're not talking about sexual freedom for women. We're only talking about men in this culture. They could have homosexual sex. That was not out of bounds at all. In other words, they could do anything with anyone that they desired. They made the rules. Now, let's be honest, 50% of the population were slaves. And so for them, there was not this freedom sexually. It was only for the people that had power and wealth and influence. And so today, we look at that and say, wow, this is this is so crazy. I mean, we would never stand for that. We have built into our ethic this idea of consensual sex. That was meaningless in those days. So let's jump in with rereading from a couple weeks ago, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13. And this is what the Apostle Paul wrote. He's actually reiterating their argument, the pagan, the Greek argument about sex. He says, you say food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. In other words, the body is not eternal, and so we can do whatever we want with the body, and sex is simply like any other appetite. If you have a desire for sex, fulfill that desire. If you have a desire for food, go get food. Whatever it might be, it's like nothing else. I mean, it's just like any other desire, I should say. So we know that's not true. We know it instinctively. I mean, every law we have makes a distinction between abuse and then sexual abuse. You know, you can spank your child with a glue stick or a paddle or a spoon, and that's going to maybe or maybe not get you in trouble with the police. But if you touch an area of the body that is sexual, you are in big trouble. This is obvious to all of us. It's one thing for a woman to be assaulted. It's a whole nother thing for a woman to be sexually assaulted. You see, we know that there's a difference. We know that there is a deeper impact on a person when we're talking about sex than simply other physical activity. In fact, let me just put it this way. We cannot probably remember the first time we ever played volleyball or ping pong or basketball or bowling or anything like that. We can't remember the first time we did that kind of physical activity. But there's not a person that has had sex that cannot remember that moment and what that felt like and who was involved and everything about it. It's at another level. And the Apostle Paul's going to make this point. But before I go back to his argument, let's just make this one observation and then we'll move on. And that is that the Bible's teaching regarding sex is not a reflection, but a rejection of the sexual ethics of the day. You know, this adds weight, I think, to the Bible. The Bible wasn't written so that people would like Christians. The Bible wasn't written so that the Jewish people would be adored by other cultures. The Bible recorded a sexual ethic that was counter-revolutionary to the day. Or I should say, it was revolutionary to the day. What we see today is counter-revolutionary to the original sexual revolution. So, among pagans, sexual ethics were determined by those in charge, by those with power. Now listen to what the Apostle Paul says. He says, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. And so now he's going to make a point that you cannot do whatever you want to do with whoever you want to do it with. It's actually now something where your body doesn't belong exclusively to you. It also belongs to the Lord. And then he says this, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, bodily, by the way, and he will raise us also. Verse 15, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? You see, if we're a Christian, we have been placed into the body of Jesus Christ. We belong to him. I know it's mystical, but at the same time, we're in him and he is in us through the person of the Holy Spirit. Then he goes on to say this, shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? The expected answer is absolutely not. In fact, the Apostle Paul interjects the word never. So, observation number 2 here is that it is up to us to decide who gets to decide the purpose of sex. It's up to us to decide. Is it going to be us who decides the purpose of sex, or is it going to be God who decides the purpose of sex? What are the parameters? What are the rules? What are the ethics, the morality surrounding sex? Do I get to decide that, or does God get to decide that? You know, I remember as a young person, I grew up in the 60s. I was an adolescent, and my sister was 6 years older than me, and she was a hippie, and she liked the whole revolutionary lifestyle. Sexual liberation was a world that she grew up in, and the phrase that was often used is this, that I should be able to have sex with any other consenting adult, and it's none of your business who I have sex with. That was sexual liberation. That was the sexual revolution. But it had to do with this one little rule that the other person had to be a consenting adult. And I got thinking about that. What are the 3 options about who I get to have sex with? About who gets to decide what I do with my body? And so one option would be this, the confusion option. And the confusion option simply says, everybody gets to decide for themselves. There is no rules here. There is no absolute moral ethic. There is no absolute right and wrong when it comes to sexuality and sex. Well, the problem is that violates that one little phrase, consenting adults. We all know, deep in our heart, that it's wrong to have sex with children. They can't give informed consent, right? They're not old enough. It's not okay to have sex with drunk people. It's not okay to have sex with people that are maybe mentally handicapped. They can't think through the situation, whatever it might be. You can't have sex with people that can't give legitimate consent. And we're probably all fine with that. And so most of us, I think, would reject the idea that we're just free to make any decision we want because we honor that principle of informed consent or 2 consenting adults. So maybe we'd feel, as a culture, more comfortable with number 2, contradiction. And that is, I think that I should be able to have sex with anybody whenever, for whatever reason that I want to, as long as there's consent. Well, we're still stuck with that question, says who? Like if I'm gonna decide for myself what is consent, or even do I really need consent in this particular situation, then I am the last word in terms of morality for me. In other words, I'm going to decide my morality by what I feel. And so that's fine, but we can never use the word should regarding someone else. That's the confusion. And I think that's where we are today. When you reject this moral lawgiver, when you reject the idea that there's objective moral truth or objective moral facts, you're going to live in this world of contradiction when you try to do whatever you want to do. Third option is command. And that's simply, I believe in God's moral ethics. He said what's right and what's wrong, and I'm surrendering and submitting to His rules, his ways, his will, and his wisdom when it comes to sexual ethics. I know that consent is important because he said it was important. In other words, I'm not making it up as I go. I'm actually believing that there is a way that's right, and God has determined that way. He's right. He is the objective moral reality in the universe. Let's continue the passage. 1 Corinthians 6, now verse 16. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? We're going to talk about this idea of the body or the flesh. For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. So what do we mean by that? Well, I think the body or the flesh is the embodiment of personhood. And it's important that we understand the purpose of sex in terms of its ability to connect us now with another human being. Again, Moses said, and Jesus said, and the Apostle Paul reiterated the idea that that two people become one flesh when they get married. They make a commitment to each other. No longer are they naked and ashamed, but together they're naked and unashamed. They're vulnerable, and now they're making a commitment to each other in such a way that they're saying, I belong to you and you belong to me. We are in this together. This is a world of self-donation. This is a world in which I contribute my whole self to another person, and the sexual act is a symbol that nothing I have belongs to me exclusively. I am one with you financially, psychologically. I'm vulnerable to you emotionally. I'm vulnerable to you in every kind of way, physically being represented by nakedness. And now this sexual act connects us in a symbolic way so that we can build trust and that there can be intimacy. That's where we're going with this. This is the Christian ethic of sexuality. Sex connects. Listen to this. Here's my third observation. Sex is a means of gratification. Yeah, it's supposed to be pleasurable. It's supposed to be a celebration of marriage and love. And it's also a means of procreation. It's a way to have kids. But most importantly, it is an act of self-donation. You know, I was reading 1 Corinthians 7, that's the next chapter, and the Apostle Paul is saying some kind of crazy stuff. He says, you know what, men, don't deprive your wife of sex for very long. Wives, don't deprive your husbands of sex for very long. Don't forget you belong to each other. And don't deprive each other, or else you're going to give Satan a foothold in your marriage, because unfortunately, our self-control will not be able to stand that. And so the Apostle Paul's getting real about how we're wired, how we're made, especially sexually. But the most important thing is, he says, make a regular donation of yourself to your spouse, connecting yourselves with each other so that you will be strong together, that you will be thriving as a couple. I love what Ann Voskamp, she wrote a book called 1,000 Gifts that I thought was fantastic, but she says this. She says, your naked body deserves the honor of being shared only with someone who is covenanted to, I like to just say, promised in such a way that they'll never stop loving your naked soul. So let me say that again. Your naked body, your vulnerability, deserves the honor of being shared only with someone who is in it with you, has made a promise to you, has made a covenant to stick in there no matter what. You are going to give your life to each other. You're going to build intimacy together and never stop loving your naked soul, that vulnerable naked soul. Everybody who's married deserves that honor. And I call that counter-revolutionary in terms of today. It actually goes back to the original sexual revolution, but it's counter-revolutionary today. See, we live in this world where sexual ethics are determined individually. And I think that is the root or foundation of our problems. Instead of submitting to a law outside of ourselves, to a sexual ethic that was commanded to me, and submitting my life to God's will and ways, we've decided for ourselves what we want and what we like. It's hard to talk about this because, let's face it, in America, there is a lot of sexual sin, and it's found its way into the church. And part of me really resists just saying, stop it, right? I don't think that actually works. And so I worked hard on coming up with an illustration that would help us understand the value of one person being married to one person and having sex within the confines of that one commitment we make for the rest of our lives. And so I thought about what's taking place in America today financially. What we are experiencing is inflation. And inflation, they say sometimes, too many dollars chasing too few of goods. But really, inflation is just the result of too many dollars in the system. It's the result of printing money, so to speak, or sometimes it's called quantitative easing. Whatever word you want, it is too many dollars in the system. And so the dollar is devalued. Here's the connection. If sex is everywhere in our world, and we experience sex outside of marriage, and there's many sexual partners or even pornography or whatever it might be, when sex is everywhere and all the time, and not just with your spouse, it devalues the connecting capability of sex. It lessens the ability of sex to build intimacy in your marriage through vulnerability. You can't have that many sexual partners and still have the same connecting capacity that sex offers, is all I'm saying. I know that this is difficult for a lot of people, but listen to me. I'm saying that we can join the counter-revolution and submit to God's will and His ways, and therefore enjoy the predictable consequence of thriving. I've said it before. If we could see everything that God has seen, and when I say that, I mean see inside people's hearts, understand people's hearts, understand what they're thinking and feeling. If we could see everything God could see in connection with sex, would we not create the same directives, the same boundaries, the same commands, the same rules, whatever you want to call it? Wouldn't we give the same advice, the same parameters as God gave us? I think we would. If you saw all the negative consequences of sex outside of marriage, rape, incest, molestation, unwanted sexual advances, sexual abuse, all the pornography, everything that is destroying the connectivity in our world for husbands and wives, if we could see all of that, we would give the same commands He's given, the same objective moral truth that He's delivered to us. He is for us, and now He's inviting us to join Him in living lives of thriving. Now, one thing that we do at SMCC is we don't just talk about a problem, we try to offer solutions. And so if you're a person that is trying to wrap your mind around some of God's moral ethics for sexuality, we are offering a 6-week seminar. It's going to be every Wednesday night at our Draper campus. And at this seminar, we're going to listen to a guy named Preston Sprinkle talking about Christian ethics, sexual morality in every area. And it's going to be really interesting, and I think it's going to be really helpful. We're going to separate our teens from parents or adults and let them have some of their own discussions and adults have some of their own discussions. It's going to be helpful for anybody who comes. I guarantee that. I've already listened to a lot of these talks, and they're so helpful. So I want to invite you to that. But for right now, let me pray and ask God to help us in this world that we're trying to navigate of so few people under the enjoyment of God's sexual ethic. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we're asking that you help us understand the goodness of your plan and also at the same time understand the wisdom of what it means to follow you in terms of your sexual ethic. God, once we understand, I pray that you give us the self-control and the power to obey what you've commanded. And then, Lord, I pray that you would bring thriving to our homes so that we might enjoy your goodness in every sense of that word. Thank you for this help, Lord, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Paul, for that message, and thank you for trusting us with your time here at SMCC Online. Before I let you go, I want to make sure that you understand something, that we get to do what we do here at SMCC Online and really at SMCC at our locations because there are hundreds of people who have said yes to partnering with us financially. In fact, thousands of people every weekend, whether it be online or at one of our locations, get to hear helpful and hopeful messages like this one each weekend because hundreds of people have said yes to partnering with SMCC financially. In fact, I mentioned Easter earlier. There's going to be thousands and thousands of people that will be at Easter services this year across our locations, and friends and family and co-workers are going to be invited to those services to hear about the gospel, to hear about Jesus. And that is all possible because people are saying yes to partnering with us financially. And so if you would like to choose to do that yourself, or if you just like more information on what that looks like, you can go to smccutah.org/give. Thank you again for being here today, and I look forward to having you join us back here online or at one of our locations next week for week 4 of Revolutions. Take care.